Hello and welcome to World Religions Unit 2, and in this unit we're going to be covering indigenous religions. The first thing to know about indigenous religions is that they are religions, plural. They're not a single religion. They're not a single unified set of beliefs. Rather, we call something an indigenous religion because it is one of a group of religions that have some key similarities, some key traits in common. Indigenous, the word, means localized, or of an area, local to an area, if you will. So what we're really talking about here are religions that grew up as the belief system of a particular people in a particular place. So these are not universalizing religions. That is to say, they don't make a claim to be the religion of humankind. They are simply the religions of a particular tribe or a particular group of people somewhere in the world. That being said, they do have certain traits in common. And most of this lecture will just be going over these traits and describing briefly what they are and a little bit about what they look like. So the first two traits in common. First is that indigenous religions tend to be practiced by primal people. Primal means it has the same root as primitive, which we associate with backwards or non-technological. But what's probably a better thing to know is that primal also shares a root with the word prime, original, right? A prime number, a primary number. Primary is another word with the same root. So when we see that prime, we should always think not so much primitive in the negative sense, but we should think more along the lines of primary or original. These religions are often the original religions. In fact, yes, they are. They are the original religions that were practiced almost universally by human beings from most likely prehistory, as far as we can tell, certainly prehistory, and then all the way through early history. And then even today, they're still practiced by people who live in a more primal, non-technological setting. So they tend to originate in non-technologically advanced settings. That being said, also be aware that primal religions or indigenous religions, if you will, are making something of a comeback in highly technological societies. This is interesting. There are many writings and theses and opinions about why this is taking place, but things like paganism, Wicca, Druidic practice, Native American faiths are experiencing a revival, often by people who are not of the original practicing group. Most people seem to agree, most experts seem to agree, that this has to do with some of the experiential aspects of these faiths. They're very hands-on, and they're very pragmatic in some ways, and they don't tend to try and universalize. They tend to stay as the faith of a group of people, and you just believe what you believe, and there's no claim on the belief of others. And they're simple. They're not hierarchical and text-based, but let's keep moving ahead. I think that will become obvious enough. Secondly, they tend to have deities. This is a specialized word for gods, okay, forces of nature or forces beyond nature. I say deities, oftentimes they are plural. There are many gods. Always, we need to be careful to understand that most of these systems don't just say there are many gods, or there are many main gods, or that there are all these equal gods out there. very often what we encounter in these systems is a kind of what I would call a mitigated monotheism. And what that means is that there is a highest God, or maybe two highest gods, that are truly the creator gods, the ultimate origins of the divine. But more often than not, these gods are so godlike. They're so beyond the human realm. They're so spiritualized and removed that human beings cannot affect them. They cannot talk to them. They don't have access to them in any practical sense. So how this plays out is that there are all these lesser deities, these spirits, that you can connect with and are more responsive to the human condition. Next, we have animism. Animism is a bit of a catch-all term, but it relates back to what I just said about there are lots of spirits mediating between the spirit world and the material world. And animism is a belief system that holds that there are many spirits and that they are permeating, or they are everywhere throughout the material world, even if they're unseen. And these spirits are in everything. So animals have a spirit, and people have a spirit, and the earth has a spirit. A particularly magnificent collection of rocks might have a spirit, right? A spirit of place, not a rock spirit, but there may be something about that place that is spiritual. And because of this, these faiths tend to view that everything in the material world also has a spiritual aspect to it, and that the spirits can influence what happens in the material world positively or negatively. So if you, for example, hunt and you kill an animal, in some way, in most of these systems, you're supposed to give a kind of thanks or a praise to the spirit of the animal. You're supposed to acknowledge that the animal's spirit has contributed to your spirit, right? That it has done its part, and the animal has fulfilled its role as the hunted, and that the hunter owes that spirit thanks for, being prey, even, because that's the nature of that animal's spirit. The spirit of the hunt, the spirit of the chase, whatever it is. Rivers are one that are frequently, since most civilizations are built close to a source of fresh water, the spirit of that fresh water is very important. Because if the fresh water behaves badly, right, it floods or tips canoes, whatever the case may be, then it's because the spirits are, it harms people, and they figure that shows that the spirits are angry with them. On the other hand, if the spirit of the water behaves positively, it can help with crops or just the land, generally, if it's a hunter-gatherer society, provides fresh water, so on and so forth. Now this gets us to the concept of mana, and like a person with a truly dorky heritage, I've posted here the mana colors from the card game Magic the Gathering. And I do that because it's kind of a joking way of expressing. In Magic the Gathering, the card game, there are these different powers that represent aspects of reality. So green is like the woods or forest, blue would be the water, red is chaos, black is evil. And you have to have a certain amount of mana to play your cards. So you're like a wizard, and you're fighting other wizards. And what you have to do is you have to tap into your creatures and your forces and your natural disasters to harm the other person or protect yourself from them. But to do so, you have to first put into play a certain amount of mana, and that's how much spiritual power you have, or magic power you have in this case. Now, obviously that's a card game, and we're talking about real religions here, religions that have been the most common throughout human history, in fact. But I think that the concept of a pool of power, a pool of spiritual power, not magical power so much, but it's fine line, but a pool of spiritual power is important in most indigenous religions because that's how the divine realm is accessed. Mana is a catch-all term. Okay, so on any given indigenous religion, don't read through and expect to find them saying so-and-so has a lot of mana. Okay, it won't say that. Mana is a religious studies word. It's a catch-all term that means a pool of spiritual power. Almost all of these religions have this notion that spirit or spiritual power congregates. You know, I keep saying pools. It gathers in people or in things. So there's a certain amount of mana in different places, and that can lead to people or places becoming very important. Like if you have a particular area that's thought to have a lot of mana, then the spirits are especially potent in that location. Or if you have a person with a lot of mana, you end up with a very powerful, spiritually powerful, or spiritually enlightened person. And this does lead to another trait, which is magic. Now, magic does not always mean you're just casting a spell. What magic means in this context is there is the spirit world or spiritual reality to the world and everything in the world, right? From animism. It pools in certain people in certain places, whether they be people, animals, natural areas. And so the spirit world interacts with and affects the material world. Because of that, it's very important to get the most out of your spiritual world, right? It makes sense. If the spiritual world can impact what happens to the material world, and certainly we care about the material world because that's where we eat, sleep, breathe, have stuff, raise families, get partners, so on and so forth. Obviously, we're going to want to call upon these spirits. We want these spirits to work for us and not against us. So tapping into that spiritual reality and maneuvering it, to manipulating it, if you will, to be in your favor is the nature of magic as we're using it here.